When I think of Australia, I think of a lot of things. One is silly people, funny accents. Another
Sure.
one is Australians learnt from their mistakes and have become good conservationists. That's what I think. Okay. I
Interesting.
could be wrong.
Interesting.
That's just the impression that I get. Right.
Well, I
Which
love that
is
you
like,
get
all
that
right,
impression. I mean, you could make that argument about some parts of the U.S., for example.
oh, I would say the whole of the US. I would say
Um,
the US in general has been like, wow, we really fucked up. Like we eliminated our bison and we nearly crashed all of our fisheries. And now we have pretty strict regulations around all of those species. So yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I agree, but continue.
I think that I think you give yourself a lot of praise there. I'm going to back that compliment down to like a 7, and
Okay.
emphasize the sum of America. I think that's definitely true. But what I think they have in common is a shift of basically back in the 19th century, if you had a ton of money and you love wild places and wild things, you would get together an expedition on a ship and go shoot something or film it, or later on you'd film it, you take photographs, you paint it, you go on that. Now, with much of the world has been obviously at least discovered, if not studied, now what's happening in the US and Australia and other affluent nations is people get a bunch of money and then they buy and rewild habitat. And that's happening a lot more in the US. I mean, you want to talk about bison. I mean, if it wasn't for Ted Turner's billions, I mean, who would have thought watching the Atlanta Braves would pay for anything? And then that's what happened with CNN and the TNT and all these things. And that's happening in Australia too. We're doing a lot more of that. But I will say this is what gives me heart. Talk about some of the recent events in Alaska, trying to drill near salmon hatcheries and a whole bunch of different things. And concerned citizen groups unifying indigenous peoples, fishermen, other industries, tourism. They get together and fight against what would destroy the habitat. And I think Australia has done that as well, but we are not perfect. I mean, where I come from in Tasmania, which I think is heaven on earth, we have those filthy salmon farms off the coast that destroy
I thought you were going to say Tasmanians. I thought you were going to say we have those filthy Tasmanians just running around ruining the place.
We are pungent. We are pungent. We are not filthy. And there is a difference, and you fucking know it.
Well, we're all human and we all suck.
So, given that my general feelings towards Australia is like, wow, they're sort of forefront of conservation now, you can imagine my shock when I read a headline today, which says conservationists welcome gillnet fishing ban in the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Site. As in, they've been gillnetting in the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Site up until now, and will continue to, by the way, until 2027. The ban is to take place by 2027.
That's the Great Barrier Reef.
Which part
the main
of the Great
one.
Barrier Reef? Which part of it? Because it's huge. It's bigger than most countries. Where is it?
Yeah, I mean, I know there are net-free. I mean, look, I know it's in Queensland. I know there are net-free zones. I haven't looked at a map of it, but I was just shocked.
I mean, look, that shocks me as well. I've spent a lot of time up there, dived a lot of it, sailed all through it from the bottom to the top. So that does surprise me because I've never seen a fishing boat there at any time I've been there. So I don't really know what that means. I wonder if it had anything to do with indigenous fishermen or the Northern Third, says Kyle, Gulf of Carpentaria. Okay, that makes more sense. So in the north, we share the fishing waters with a number of our northern partners from Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. It's a difficult and tense area. A lot of indigenous fishing rights there. The Gulf of Carpentaria is probably, in my opinion, what you would call shrimp and I would call prawn, the best fishery for shrimp and prawn on the planet. Huge protected bay, warm waters. I mean, these banana shrimp, get up to over 12 inches long, not scampi, just shrimp. And it's the most delicious, great fishing too. I've caught incredible giant trevally up there. It's a terrific place for fishing. Now, I know that they have those monstrous factory ships for the shrimping. I know that that's there. So Forrest Gump, gone steroids is what they have up there. I don't know how this is relevant to that, but
that would be a trawler. This is talking about gillnets specifically.
Yeah, but you run out behind a. Well, isn't that a similar thing, but on a smaller scale?
No, not typically. So gillnetting usually is where you set a large, long net, and whatever swims into it gets stuck. Whereas trawler will actually
on the buoys.
On buoys, exactly. Whereas a trawler, put a big net out, drag it, and scoop it up.
Man.
Yeah, you set and forget the gill net.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Kyle pulled up a picture here so you can clearly see.
I didn't know anyone in the first world was doing, any developed country was doing that.
I was shocked. But also, I want to go back to something here, and I think this is an important thing to talk about for a moment, which is the whole, it's tragedy of the commons, right? Oh, well, the Gulf of Carpentaria is shared waters between us and 2 other nations. Well, we're not going to stop fishing it because they're not going to stop fishing it, right? That's the mentality behind those things. That's tragedy of the commons.
Often the case, like carbon emissions,
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, with a zillion different things, but I mean, at least Australia, assuming that those other nations do not have the same legislation in place, which I highly, highly doubt if it's Indonesia.
Will not. I can't imagine it. No.
Yeah. Then at least Australia is making a stand in the right direction there. So I don't know. I was just shocked.
And maybe that's the real value of this. The real value of this is the public declaration that this form of fishing is off the table. But look, I'm all for trumpeting the great victories of conservation in the Southern Hemisphere, many of which are originated or run by my fellow Australians. But I would say I'm often shocked that certain things are happening. You were just out at Ningaloo, right? Not that long ago.
Yeah. Like,
did you see the damage of some of the trawlers that have come through and just ripped apart those coral beds and all these giant fan corals? The biggest I've seen on the planet. Call me a liar. Biggest golf ball coral, the biggest fan corals I've ever seen. I've seen on the west coast of Western Australia, Ningaloo and the Marion Islands. And then you get these parts that just look like someone has dragged a giant rake across the ground. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. And so we are guilty of doing that. But I think that the larger takeaway is that it only takes 1 or 2 of these industrial size fishing enterprises to destroy an ecosystem for a very long time. You can unfuck it, but it takes a lot of money, a lot of will, and a lot of patience, and
a lot of good people who aren't fucking shitty.
And that's getting done, but it's so much more effort to fix something that was damaged than it is to just you know what? We'll make one more sweep on the reef, see what we get, and boom, you've crushed a habitat for 20 million species.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I didn't see them, but everybody, do you know Jake Wilton? He's a very well-known underwater photographer from that part of the world.
I'm sure I've seen his work, but no, I don't know him personally, no.
Yeah, so he was telling me all about it. So I haven't seen it. He showed me some pictures. I do think that it's interesting. So we were in Coral Bay and then in Exmouth, and Coral Bay is like, it's like one of these little hippy dippy towns where everybody wants to save the dolphins. And I mean this in a very positive light, but it's like, everybody's like, oh, let's save the dolphins. They're like all these hippie weird.
Yeah, that's exactly how we sound.
It is. Yeah, it is. And, but in a good way. So it had this whole vibe and aura of conservation in that town. And not like a consumptive thing. And it almost had a feeling of imbalance where it's like, oh, well, they're not talking about, and maybe it was just the people that we were working with, but it was like, oh, they're not talking about the reality of what's actually going on. Instead, they're doing the whole going too far overboard to try and promote the conservation, if you know what I mean, where it's
it sounds
so
disingenuous.
Far beyond it. Yeah, it
doesn't sound plausible, doesn't sound real. Yeah, it's interesting because some of the best projects I've ever seen were run by farmers, who just had a passion for wildlife. They loved where they lived. They felt accountable for some of the things that they were part of that had damaged the environment, and they wanted to be part of the solution. They'd set aside part of their property to rewild. They'd also fenced off areas for soft release for native birds and small mammals that have been wiped out by feral cats and foxes. You don't have to be a hippy dippy to get into it. Obviously, look at us. What a pack!